What's up, everybody? Dre here, back with Dre Talk Sports. And today we've got one of those grab bag episodes where we're hitting multiple storylines at once because honestly, that's the kind of week it's been around the league. We're still weeks out from training camp. So instead of one big breaking story, I want to walk you through a handful of angles that are all genuinely worth talking about. Where Joe Burrow actually stacks up in this AFC North quarterback race right now, which current and former Bengals actually have a realistic path to Canton one day, the never-ending throwback jersey conversation that fans have been begging for, and a fascinating what-if storyline involving Max Crosby that might not be as dead as everybody assumes. Let's get into all of it. Let's start with the quarterback room across this division because I think people sleep on just how lopsided this thing actually is when you rank it top to bottom. At the very bottom, and it's not particularly close, you've got whatever is going on in that Cleveland Browns quarterback room. As of right now, the Browns are reportedly carrying 4 quarterbacks on that roster. And from everything coming out of camp, it sounds like Deshaun Watson is currently being positioned as the guy heading into the season. Now, look, I'm not going to spend a ton of time relitigating the Watson contract situation because at this point, everybody already knows the story. It's widely regarded as one of the worst contracts in modern NFL history, and the on-field production simply hasn't been there to justify it. So whether you're talking about Watson specifically or the overall instability in that quarterback room as a unit, Cleveland sits at the bottom of this division's quarterback rankings, and that's not particularly controversial. Shedeur Sanders is the more interesting piece of that Cleveland puzzle, honestly, as a rookie. He started 7 games and went 3-4, which is one of those records that could genuinely be read either way depending on your perspective. Not a disaster, not anything to get excited about either, just a rookie who showed flashes without fully looking like a finished product. But here's what makes this genuinely worth tracking. According to ESPN Cleveland's Tony Rizzo, as of late June, the Browns have actually been fielding trade calls regarding Shedeur Sanders, and Rizzo doesn't believe Cleveland is going to enter training camp still carrying all 4 quarterbacks on that roster. Rizzo's reporting specifically quoted the organization's internal sentiment as believing, for whatever reason, that Sanders simply isn't viewed as their guy long term. That's a notable disconnect because it sounds like his actual trade value around the league might be sitting higher than where he was originally drafted, with speculation pointing toward potential landing spots like Tampa Bay, Detroit, or Green Bay if Cleveland does decide to move on. I'll be honest, I haven't seen enough from Sanders yet to confidently call him a clear starting caliber quarterback long term, but he's clearly shown enough that he could step in and win you a game or two in a short stretch if a starter goes down somewhere, if Cleveland really has no long-term use for him while they're in full rebuild mode. Taking back more draft capital is probably the smart organizational move. Either way, that's 4th in this division, regardless of whether it ends up being Watson or Sanders running things in Cleveland. 3rd in the division is Aaron Rodgers, and this one's interesting because of just how much complexity surrounds his current standing. He's 42 years old now, went 10-7 as a starter last season, lost in the wildcard round, and has now reunited with Mike McCarthy, his old head coach from a 13-year stretch back in Green Bay. He's already told everybody this upcoming season is going to be his final year in the league. ESPN's Mike Sando made a pretty blunt point about where Rodgers currently sits statistically, essentially noting that by just about every measurable stat, he was the worst quarterback to make the postseason in 2025. That's a rough label, but it's also Aaron Rodgers. And you simply cannot ignore that he can still occasionally pull off a throw or sequence that reminds you why he's a future Hall of Famer. He's just not the same dominant force he once was. Still talented, still has an elite football mind, but his physical tools have clearly slipped a level from where they used to be. 3rd in the division feels right. Then you get to the real conversation, which is Burrow versus Lamar Jackson, and I think this debate is genuinely going to rage on forever, depending entirely on which specific week or season you're evaluating. Lamar's won MVP twice, though one of those wins is still debated by some who felt Josh Allen had a stronger case that year. He's nearing the back half of his current contract, and he's got real defensive talent around him now with Trey Hendrickson in the fold. But here's where I land on the actual separation between these two guys, and it really comes down to playoff results. Lamar has never reached a Super Bowl. Burrow has. Burrow has won an AFC championship. Lamar has not. Burrow's postseason record sits well above 500, and Lamar's simply doesn't match that mark. Burrow does carry a more extensive injury history, sure, but Lamar has actually missed a comparable number of games of his own dating back to around 2021. So by the slimmest of margins, I'm putting Lamar at number 2 in this division. purely because postseason success is the tiebreaker I'm leaning on here. Any given week, either one of these two guys can be the best quarterback on the planet. But across a larger body of work, the separation shows up specifically in January. Which brings us to number one, and it's Joe Burrow, full stop. He's won Comeback Player of the Year twice now, which on its own tells you something about both his talent and his resilience. He finished fourth in MVP voting on 2 separate occasions, and while that's technically a mark against him relative to Lamar's 2 actual MVP trophies, I'd argue MVP voting is just that, a vote subject to narrative and team record rather than a pure formulaic measure of on-field production. There's a real case that Burrow probably should have won the award outright in 2024 when he posted a near 5,000-yard, 43-touchdown season that's about as statistically dominant as it gets at the position. And when he came back from injury last season, he looked every bit as elite as he'd ever been. He is the unquestioned cornerstone of this Bengals team and, in my opinion, the cornerstone of this entire division. Now, if you put me in a room and forced me to pick which of these 2 quarterbacks I'd rather have walking into a single playoff game, I'd probably lean Lamar, and it's not because Lamar's worse. It's because there's genuinely something about the energy and the moment with Lamar Jackson in the playoffs, for better or worse. Just like there's something in the air on the positive side, specifically when it comes to Joe Burrow in those same moments. But across the larger body of work, Burrow sits at number 1 in this division for me, and it's not particularly close. Now let's shift gears into something a little more fun and a lot more long-term, because I want to talk about which current and former Bengals actually have a realistic shot at a Hall of Fame jacket one day, starting with Burrow himself. If his career somehow ended today, he is not getting into the Hall of Fame. He'd be a Hall of Very Good guy, no disrespect intended, but the resume simply wouldn't be complete. Across 7 or 8 seasons, he's missed significant time on multiple occasions and has played through injury in others. But here's the part that should genuinely excite you. He's currently on pace to be the 4th fastest quarterback in NFL history to reach 200 career touchdown passes, trailing only Patrick Mahomes, Dan Marino, and Aaron Rodgers. He's been a finalist for MVP twice and won Comeback Player of the Year twice. If he plays another 5 healthy seasons at anywhere close to this level, you are absolutely having a real Hall of Fame conversation. Win a Super Bowl on top of that, and I think he's essentially a lock. There have been quarterbacks who've made it into the Hall without ever winning it all, but they had to be truly elite across an extended career to get there, and Burrow's body of work so far suggests he's fully capable of that path if his health cooperates. Jamar Chase is a very similar conversation. 5 seasons into his career, he's already the franchise leader in receptions per game and receiving yards per game. He won the receiving Triple Crown back in 2024, which is an incredibly rare accomplishment in this league. 4 Pro Bowl selections already. If he keeps up his current pace, he's projected to pass Chad Johnson as the franchise's all-time receiving leader by around Halloween of this upcoming season. Like with Burrow, his Hall of Fame case really comes down to longevity. Possession-style receivers and slot guys tend to have longer, more sustainable careers, but true deep threat receivers like Chase often have shorter statistical peaks. If he can sustain this current level of production for roughly 5 more seasons, he becomes a legitimate shoo-in. Geno Atkins just hit Hall of Fame eligibility this year, and his resume is genuinely strong. 8 Pro Bowl selections, 2 first-team All-Pro nods, and he was one of the most disruptive interior defensive linemen of his entire era. He didn't make the finalist cut for the 2026 class, but he'll remain on the ballot for years to come. Unfortunately for him, the competition at his position over the coming years is brutal, with names like Aaron Donald entering eligibility soon as well. Still, I think Atkins has the resume to eventually break through, and out of every recent Bengal, he might genuinely be the most likely to end up wearing a gold jacket sometime this decade. T. Higgins isn't quite in that conversation yet. He needs another full contract's worth of production to get there. Trey Hendrickson, now with the Ravens, needs a few more double-digit sack seasons under his belt, and Willie Anderson, while not part of the current era, has actually been a finalist for 4 consecutive years now and remains one of the most overlooked offensive linemen of his generation, still waiting for his moment. Switching gears entirely now, let's talk uniforms, because this is one of those topics that comes up every single offseason and Bengals fans never stop asking about it. We are officially on throwback watch again. Fans love the current Leaping Tiger logo and the existing uniform set, but there's a long-standing soft spot for those classic stripe designs with a simple striped armband that defined an earlier era of this franchise. Right now, the Bengals don't actually have an NFL-approved true throwback uniform in rotation. What they do have is the home black, the road white, an alternate orange look, and white alternate helmets with orange pants. And to be clear, those are genuinely great-looking uniforms. But compare that to teams like Green Bay or Pittsburgh who've leaned hard into true throwback designs. And you can see why fans keep asking for more. The NFL changed its uniform rules a couple of years back to allow teams to wear alternate or throwback designs up to 4 times a season, which opened the door for more of this kind of thing league-wide. On top of that, there's the league's broader rivalries uniform program rolling out in phases. The AFC East and NFC West got their dedicated rivalry uniforms back in 2025. The AFC South and NFC North are getting theirs this year. The NFC East and AFC West follow in 2027, and the AFC North, which includes the Bengals, isn't scheduled to get its rivalry-themed uniform until 2028. So that's still a few years away. In the meantime, fans have been speculating about whether the Bengals might bring back something like a plain orange helmet reminiscent of the late 60s, or a reissue of their early 80s Super Bowl era look. Every time the team's social media teases something with coming soon language, the fan base immediately floods the comments hoping for that Leaping Tiger helmet and the classic striped sleeves to make a comeback. As of right now, nothing new has been officially announced for this upcoming season, and it's genuinely unclear what internal hurdles or considerations are holding things up. But if you're a fan who's been hoping for this for years, just know that the official 2028 rivalry uniform is locked in as the next confirmed step, and anything before that would just be a welcome bonus on top. Now let's close this out with maybe the most fascinating storyline of the bunch, because it's a genuine path not taken situation that could still circle back around later this season. Rewind back to before the Dexter Lawrence trade went down. According to reporting from Tony Pauline of Essentially Sports, just before the draft, the Bengals had actually offered their 10th overall pick to the Raiders in a straight-up trade for Max Crosby. The Ravens reportedly countered with 2 first-round picks of their own. The Bengals weren't willing to match that offer, and the Ravens deal famously fell apart shortly after when Crosby failed his physical. By the time all of that played out, Cincinnati had already pivoted its attention toward Dexter Lawrence instead. Here's my honest take on this, looking back with the benefit of hindsight. I am significantly happier the Bengals ended up with Dexter Lawrence instead of Max Crosby, and I don't think it's particularly close. Crosby is 28 years old, a 5-time Pro Bowler with nearly 70 career sacks, and he genuinely would have served as a true one-for-one replacement for the void left by Trey Hendrickson. Lawrence is also 28, a 3-time Pro Bowler, but he anchors the interior of the defensive line instead, and these two players fundamentally solve very different problems for an organization. We've actually heard from Bleacher Report's Gary Davenport that Crosby could theoretically still become available later this year if the Raiders fall out of playoff contention early. Given that the franchise is in a clear rebuilding mode and Crosby himself is coming off an injury. So if the Bengals get off to a hot start and find themselves believing this is genuinely their year, there's a version of this story similar to the Sauce Gardner trade approach the Colts made last season, where Max Crosby could still end up in Cincinnati down the road. Obviously, you don't want it to play out that way for the Raiders, but the door isn't fully shut. Just sit with that for a second. Warren Sapp level interior disruption from Lawrence, paired with Boye Mafe and a potential Max Crosby addition on the edges. That would be an absolutely disgusting defensive front on paper. But I want to be clear, that's not a realistic expectation to bank on for this season. It's just a fun hypothetical worth keeping in the back of your mind if Las Vegas struggles out of the gate. When I actually evaluate which move ended up being the right one, I keep landing on Dexter Lawrence. Think back to what Trey Hendrickson accomplished back in 2024. He led the entire league in sacks that season, and it genuinely didn't matter because that defense was historically bad regardless. Now, the Bengals have built considerably more depth and support around this defense heading into this season, so I do think guaranteed elite sack production would have made a real difference if they'd gone the Crosby route instead. And to be fair, I think the Bengals still have legitimate sack production on this roster even without him, with Boye Mafe in the fold, real optimism around Cassius Howell, and Myles Murphy continuing to develop. But Dexter Lawrence brings so much more to the table than just sack totals. He generates consistent interior pressure, he commands double teams that free up everybody else around him, and he does all of that specifically from the defensive tackle position, which this roster has desperately lacked for years. Trey Hendrickson is elite, truly one of the best in the league at that one specific skill, and that skill is incredibly valuable and disruptive on its own. But when you need an edge rusher to consistently set the edge against the run or drop into coverage, which admittedly isn't the strength of most pure pass rushers anyway, that's exactly where the limitations show up. Max Crosby, by contrast, is genuinely more of a complete three-down player who does a little bit of everything well. I think the Bengals would have been just fine going that direction too. But given how badly this team has needed legitimate interior pass rush disruption for years now, Dexter Lawrence was simply the right move for this specific roster at this specific point in time. So that's everything on my radar this week. Keep an eye on whatever happens in Cleveland with that quarterback situation, because I don't think Shedeur Sanders is sticking around there much longer. Keep dreaming about those throwback jerseys, even though we're still a few years away from anything officially rivalry themed. And keep half an eye on Las Vegas as the season unfolds, because if the Raiders stumble out of the gate, this Max Crosby storyline might not be finished just yet. Let me know down in the comments where you'd personally rank these AFC North quarterbacks, and whether you agree with me that Dexter Lawrence was the smarter pickup over Max Crosby. Smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Dre Talk Sports, because we're covering every single angle of this league all year long. I'm Dre, and I'll catch you in the next one.